Welcome to episode 20 of the Living Outside the Matrix podcast from lawfulrebel.com.
Lawful Rebel.
Comprehensive goals.
Lawful Rebel.
Active minds, open doors.
Lawful Rebel.
You can see the signs if you read between the lines.
Hello and welcome to the podcast for thinking people, where we challenge the assumptions of the mainstream, where we question all those things that everybody just knows. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today it's my great pleasure to be joined by Dayna Martin to discuss homeschooling in the form of unschooling, I should say. So Dayna is a mother of four and an unschooling advocate. She's an author and a conference speaker. And I believe also she's founded the Unschooling United, an organisation, a non-profit organisation that raises the awareness of unschooling. So hi Dayna, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that we finally connected and that we're doing this. This is so great.
Indeed. It's a fascinating subject, homeschooling in general, and I'm very keen to hear all about your variant unschooling. But maybe you can sort of kick us off with a little bit about your background, where you're from, and what is this thing unschooling, and how did you find yourself doing it?
Okay, sure. I grew up in New Hampshire in the U.S., and I still live in New Hampshire, actually. I live here now. I'm 44 years old. I have 4 kids. I have a son who's 18. His name is Devin. A daughter who's almost 16. Her name was Dakota, but she told me when she was 3 years old that she wanted to be called Tiffany.
Okay.
Ever since that time, we've respected that, so her name is Tiffany. I have a daughter, Ivy, who is 12, and a son, Orion, who's 9. So 2 boys and 2 girls. Let me start off by saying I never imagined doing something so radical. That I never in a million years would have guessed that we'd be doing what we're doing. I am married to a man that I met when I was 15, and he was 17. We were high school sweethearts.
Oh.
And yeah, it was just a really cool story. And you know, we were married, and 4 years later we had our first child, and that's when the whole journey began. So when I gave birth to Devin in the hospital, within moments after he was born, the nurse handed him to me and turned on the television, and the Columbine shootings were happening live, which I don't know if anybody in Australia is familiar with. Your listenership, I'm not sure what they're familiar with, but the shootings in the U.S. were a big deal, and they kind of all started then. And so it was just this pinnacle moment of life where I was seeing mothers losing their children. And it's really twisted to me that the news shows things like this live anyway, and I couldn't look away from the TV, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I was holding my newborn. And there was just this moment of time where I said to myself, how many of those kids and how many of those parents would have rather have been home that day, but didn't know they had the choice to be with their child, that they had the freedom to make that decision. And so it all started there for me, actually, as far as making this decision. I said to myself that my kids would always have the choice to go to school or not. So I didn't come at it from a place of fear, like I think a lot of people might say to myself that I don't want my kids to be shot, so I'm not putting them in school. It was more like children's rights. That whole issue was brought to the forefront for me.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, with the shooters, what those kids must have gone through in their lives, and the kids that were, the whole thing in general just got me thinking. And so that's the start for me living this life, but it was also a really kind of a naturally minded approach that brought me to this place. So attachment style parenting is something that we did from the very beginning. And
what would you describe attachment style parenting as, just for clarify?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So attachment parenting is meeting the needs of your child and not feeling as though they're manipulating you. I think that's like the foundation of it, that most parenting advice on the market today are focused on obedience and compliance and meeting the parents' needs solely. The parents' needs for quiet, uninterrupted sleep.
Right.
They don't want children to be an inconvenience.
Would you kind of call that authoritarian parenting? I know some of the listeners here in the UK might relate that to authoritarian.
I'll Okay, you're in the UK. I'm sorry. Why did I think you were in Australia, Nigel?
That's okay, no worries.
Nigel's is a name. Is a British name, isn't it?
It is it's unusual.
I just got back from the UK. Did you know that?
Say that
I was just
again?
there. I just got back from the UK.
Oh, okay. Great stuff. On your way passing through from India?
No, I went to India and then I went to the UK for 2 weeks and I spoke in Scotland. Man, if I would have known you were there, we would have connected. But I go every year, so we'll see each other next week.
Great stuff.
Yeah. So the authoritarian paradigm of parenting is more traditional. It's what most people do.
Yeah.
Which I already described. It's more focused on the parents' needs. Where what I'm promoting and what radical unschooling is, is based in a partnership-based paradigm, which is completely different.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to share about that if you'd like.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I was perhaps you could sort of offer some kind of definition of unschooling, just for our readers' benefit. But I'm also coming at this discussion from a home educator's point of view, and I'm fascinated to obviously pick your brain about some of the challenges around the whole concept. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me back that to you for some kind of definition. Do you have a definition up your sleeve?
Yeah, I do. So unschooling in itself is living life as though school doesn't exist. It's
Yes, I love it.
because I think a lot of people hear the term, like most of us that are unschooling have a love-hate relationship with the term because it's kind of misleading. People think it's uneducating, or they think it's a neglectful approach, or super permissive, or they draw all these conclusions in their mind, but what unschooling really is just not doing school. So schools are based on the authoritarian paradigm, and they're really outdated, actually. The way that they go about teaching and educating and everything about them is very outdated in a day and age where information is at our fingertips, and children learn best when they're internally motivated. So
Absolutely.
The whole premise, yeah, totally. And so the whole concept of forced learning, which is what school bases their approach on, which they need to educate so many kids at once. This whole idea of children's rights and so forth is respecting the child's needs and how they want to learn, and forced learning is really authoritarian, and most kids don't learn what the intention is for them to learn anyway. So unschooling is living life as though school doesn't exist, or not doing school. It's not educating. So
No.
education is really important to unschoolers. Education is very important to our family. Learning is really supposed to be really fun, and learning is like breathing, and it comes really easy to kids when it's not forced and when it's based on what they love to do and what they're interested in. So it's really easy to share what the approach isn't.
Yeah.
And I think that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I see if you like, the non-aggression principle as being really foundational. It kind of brought me into the whole idea of what we loosely refer to as home education. I tend to think of it as home as sort of self-led, facilitated self-education, sort of mainly in the home environment. Really, that's what we're trying to practice. But you can get bogged down with labels. But I find one of the most important principles is the fact that children are not being coerced into any situation to having their day managed for them. And in some respect, that sort of disempowers them from getting on with that, learning that life skill of how to manage your day. And of course, if you're living life as though school doesn't exist, you're right there in the thick of it, aren't you? You're managing it. You're making decisions all the time, and I think you probably are completely sold on the idea that that's the best form of education.
Well, I think kids just naturally come to this life. I think parents have a harder time trusting their children with their own education. But my role isn't my child's teacher. My role is their learning facilitator. So people hear about homeschooling and they say, like, I could never do that. Because for one, they can't even imagine forcing their children to do something else. When they're already in the dynamic of having to force them to do everything else. And it's so, when you're in the role of controlling another human being all day, every day, it's exhausting and it's not joyful. It's really miserable.
It's not. What would you say to those parents who say, wouldn't they become uncontrollable? And therein lies an interesting word, because I hear a lot of people say, how do you cope? How does it? What does it look like? What's a typical day like? I suppose you could probably enlighten people. How do you cope with those difficult times? Do you have any experiences like that?
Yeah, well, let me just share too that homeschooling, what most people do, 90% of parents today when they homeschool, they do what schools do. They buy a curriculum and they force or manipulate or coerce or however gently it's done. They're doing what schools do, the same kind of curriculum but at home. So the environment may be different, but they're doing the same thing. And forced learning and all of the trappings that come with that authoritarian paradigm are still present. So unschooling is completely doing away with the authoritarian paradigm altogether. But what it looks like is different in every single home. That's the interesting thing, and it looks different from day to day. I mean, I guess you could say that what most people do on weekends with their free time, if they could do anything they want, when they have a break from all the things that they're forced to do all day, every day, both adults and children, that's what unschooling looks like every day for my family. And so it's like just living every day as though it's summer vacation. But I think because most people are just decompressing when they have a day off, you know, the average person who has a child in the system and who goes to work in a cubicle all day, every day, doing things they don't like, they just want to decompress and just kind of zone out. Where, you know, the life that we live is really different. We facilitate our children's interests based on whatever their passions are. So, I mean, you know from something that you're super interested in, like you love learning about it. You can't get enough of it. You learn every single thing that you can about that thing. And when somebody loves you and cares about you, they bring more into your life to learn and grow from based on what you love. And that's exactly what unschooling looks like to us all day, every day. So when my kids have an interest in something, I bring as many resources into their lives to learn and grow from based on that interest.
So it doesn't sound as though, I don't get the impression that it's particularly hard work for you. You've obviously acquire a level of, it sounds like a laissez-faire form of parenting, if that's an appropriate phrase. Would you agree with that? Or is it?
I mean, I think in the sake of not controlling another person all day, every day, maybe it's joyful and it's easier than controlling somebody. However, it's definitely not for the lazy parent because you have to be actively involved. You have to be facilitating. It's to be completely hands-off and not facilitate their interests is neglectful, and it's not really taking the role of an unschooling parent to the way that you should take it. And when your child's interested in something, you have to jump on that. When they're showing interest in learning something, or they're showing interest, that is the time when they're ripe and ready to learn about it. So no matter what you're doing, when you're home with your kids and they're showing that interest, your main role is to get up and be like, okay, like how can we do this together? How can we learn more?
Right.
For an example, for the listeners to understand, my son Devin, when he was, the interesting thing was he was probably 3 or 4 years old and he started to show an interest in fire. Like he wanted to light matches. He saw somebody light a lighter and he wanted to do it. And I think most parents' initial reaction would be to say, no, you can't do that. You can't touch that. You're too little and you could get hurt. However, a child's need for freedom and growth will override their parents' need for obedience, like almost everything.
It so should, shouldn't it? It so should. I mean, sorry to interrupt your flow, but whenever I see parent convenience trumping that or squashing that inquisitive into its box, it seems a shame, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. And so that is, rules and force and kind of ignoring that out of fear. To me, that is more lazy and more hands-off than saying, okay, well, my child has a real need right now to learn and grow from this, so how can I facilitate it safely while meeting my own needs? So we would sit in the cellar for hours, and we have a big wood furnace in the cellar that's connected to every heating vent in the house, and so we sat down there, and he just lit match after match after match, and lit some cardboard boxes on fire safely, and he loved it. He would sit at the kitchen table, we would put aluminum foil on the table, and he would light candles and play with the wax, and I think the hard thing for parents today is the whole idea of being present, that rules are a replacement for being there. Mm-hmm. And they're never guaranteed, and there's always awful side effects because kids are going to put their own instinctual need for growth and learning before your need for obedience, always. And so that's when things get really dangerous and kids go behind parents' backs and play with fire, and that's when bad things happen. And when you're present and you're connected, there really is, there's no danger. And so I think it's really important to understand that. Now, my son today, he's a blacksmith, and he also fire twirls, and he is very connected with fire, actually.
Is this Devin? Is this Dayna, your eldest? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's here right now. My son Devin's 18, and he's here with his girlfriend visiting for a week, and he had moved to Virginia for about a year down with her family and 4 months ago or so. So this is the first time I've seen him in a long time, and we were talking about this.
Great.
Yeah, and so, I would say that I think a lot of people might, with the absence of control, the absence of punishments, and the absence of the authoritarian paradigm, a parent or a person that isn't aware of a partnership-based paradigm might assume that it must be a laissez-faire kind of hands-off approach, but truly it's way more involved than an authoritarian approach. So what the partnership-based paradigm is, and this is all connected to unschooling, and I'm going to pull it all together for you in a second, because there's so many components to this philosophical perspective, and parenting is a huge part of it. So the unschooling portion, I think a lot of people really get, freedom with education.
Mm-hmm.
But the parenting side of it, I think, is a little bit harder for people to wrap their heads around, for sure.
And the parenting is so much more 24/7, isn't it? I mean, by definition, you haven't got rid of your children, in inverted commas, park them somewhere for 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever it is their day is to school and back. I know from a lot of parents here in the UK that they really value that time, and it's very difficult to, if any parent or potential parent was thinking about homeschooling, unschooling, or anything like that, I think it's quite difficult for them to imagine how they could possibly sort of, find the time to do all this and be giving 24/7 to the child's needs and being present and aware of their interests. I think that a lot of newcomers to this topic might think, my God, how do you do all that? Do you have any experiences or words of wisdom that you could throw to that sort of thought?
Well, I honestly, going back to what I said before, I really believe that it's the whole idea of parents are trained to train and control their kids, and so the idea of controlling them for 8 more hours a day, when you're getting a break from doing something extremely unpleasant. And I don't care what anyone has told you or conditioned you to believe, whoever's listening, parenting is not supposed to feel that way. It's not supposed to feel like something that you need this enormous break from. What you need a break from is controlling other humans. It's a very negative, miserable existence, and you don't have to do it. But people don't know what to do instead, and so I think that's probably the most important focus of my work and what I write about, and the focus of my book is the partnership-based paradigm. So I'm just going to share with you briefly what the difference is between the authoritarian paradigm and the partnership-based paradigm, if you're ready to move on to that.
Yes, please.
Okay. So with the authoritarian paradigm, the focus is on meeting the parents' needs solely. It's focused on meeting the authorities' needs and how to work these little people around into our lives so they're convenient and not causing us too much grief. too much inconvenience, basically. But the partnership-based paradigm is based on meeting the needs of everybody in the family equally. And so that is a lot more work, and it takes a lot more creativity, because my goal is not obedience for my children. I'm not raising kids to be obedient, to fall into the role of being controlled by other authorities once they leave our home. I want them to be free-thinking people, free-thinking entrepreneurs, free-thinking people who have had modeled to them that everybody's needs matter equally. Because children learn what they live. And we hear that term so much in our culture, but people don't really think about it very much, because what are you modeling to your kids when you're controlling them all day and sharing with them that the adults' needs matter? Well, you're training them to live that way, and they say, but they can't wait to be adults because they can then finally control other people. And it's a really, there's so many layers of dysfunction that comes with that style. But
there are, aren't there? I think one of the interesting practical upshots that people often don't realise is that we pay lip service to the idea that we want to raise children to be able to make decisions, to be able to manage their lives, to be able to be functional. And it seems that when children go through the conventional education, there are very great parallels between the UK and the American system. But you end up coming out the other end, and you're expected to know what to do, and you've been told what to do all those years, and now you're suddenly supposed to land on your feet like a cat, all right, ready to decide how to live my life, and you kind of haven't really, or most children going through school, I don't think have had a full opportunity to sort of spread their wings, and really give it a go, have they?
Right, they're living somebody else's agenda all day, every day, and they're conditioned to do so, and the time that they have to pursue their own passions becomes so small that they forget that that even exists. Because, in the authoritarian paradigm, we're raised to please others. We're raised to do what they say, and when we're obedient, good kids, then we're of and we're loved, and then we can love ourselves. And that really is damaging, because then we're turning to others constantly for approval, and did I do okay, and did you love me, and please tell me I'm good. And we're constantly craving praise and focus and attention, when all of those are supposed to just innately be part of our inner being. We don't need to be searching for outward sources for that. My kids don't have to do that. They've never been conditioned to do that. So with the partnership-based paradigm, unlike the authoritarian paradigm that's focused on behavior modification.
Yeah.
Now, let me just say, in the UK, with Super Nanny, Nanny 911, with the whole nanny series that we see over here, that was brought to America, focused on obedience in the authoritarian paradigm, the whole idea and focus of behavior modification is just like dog training.
That's horrific, isn't it? It sounds so true, and it's horrific when you say it like that.
Yeah, it's just like dog training, and I don't think people realize it. And even I think a lot of dog training is cruel to dogs, but that's another whole topic. But to focus, like when I watch that show, I watch it for a research perspective to see, and I know it's well-intentioned. So let me just say that the parents that go on there looking for help, and the nannies that are on those shows, they're well-intentioned, but they're totally enmeshed in the authoritarian paradigm and how to control kids better, how to control kids more gently, gentle discipline. Control isn't gentle. Control of any form. Control isn't peaceful. No. Control isn't kind, and it's not modeling a peaceful world where everybody's needs matter, where we respect each other. So children's rights are on the forefront of everything that I do, and I think it's really on the forefront of human evolution right now, that
Absolutely.
We need to look at how we're treating kids and understand that this is this awful cycle of narcissism. People think that the answer is more control. Like when you hear an out-of-control violent kid, the first thing people say are, oh, they don't have their ass whooped enough. It's just instantly thought of that they're not treated with enough control, when in fact these children are just modeling what is done to them every single day. So
Absolutely.
What I'm offering through this whole perspective is to let go of the whole idea of behavior modification altogether, because it's not just, it's not right. It's something that kids, of course, are going to rebel against. It's something you would rebel against if your partner or somebody that you love did to you. You would never stand for it, ever. It's the whole concept, the whole authoritarian paradigm altogether needs to be dropped and a new paradigm embraced. And so the partnership-based paradigm focuses not on behavior, but on the needs under the behavior.
Right.
However, the wonderful side of doing so is that the behavior changes when the needs are met.
Indeed. This is a really key point. This is something that I've even been noticing in my day-to-day life these days, is that sometimes events in life sort of take over, and my wife and I find that we get distracted. We have 3 young children, 9, 7 and 5, and we find that when we're not spending enough time focusing on them as opposed to managing our lives and our home and our business and what we're doing, as soon as we seem to not give them enough attention, things seem to sort of kick off, if you like, for want of a better word, and we get signs of their frustration and their needs not getting met. So that's an interesting one. I'm forever sort of becoming aware of these things and trying to learn to meet their needs.
Yeah, totally. I love that you're in that space of awareness about it, because it's something that people are excited to learn about, because it really is like this secret that's been kept from so many people, because those in power really want to train us to control our kids, because life will be easier for everybody in authority when the kids are already trained up to obey and kind of commit to.
There are sorry to interrupt you, but there are frightening implications, aren't there, of a society of schooled children that are sort of compliant and unthinking. They're almost ready to just spout out what everybody else thinks, rather than becoming thinking, functional individuals, aren't they?
Yeah.
But go on.
Sorry, go ahead, Nigel.
I was just wondering whether you could share with us some of your ideas about, when there are conflicts and when, there's arguments over this is mine or that's yours, or somebody's hitting somebody else because they're frustrating them. What sort of techniques have you used? Because I know a lot of parents are sort of concerned about, well, how do you manage it? I mean, I know we're not trying to control them. We've already discussed that. So what does that look like when you're trying to run the house and the kids are at each other's throats? I don't know whether you ever had that, but we've certainly had our fair share.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, all humans do. So our kids definitely go through that. I don't think we realize how conditioned we are until something like this comes up, and I'm going to share with you what I mean. When we were misbehaving as kids, people were angry with us for doing so. When we were angry, we weren't allowed to be anything content or happy. If we were angry, our feelings, our bad negative feelings were very inconvenient for the adults in our lives, and we were sent away. It was met with anger and hostility that we were inconveniencing them with our anger. And so the worst thing a parent can do is get angry when your kids are angry. And people have to realize that they have to be the rock. They have to be that solid person to hold the space for their kids' anger and not lose your own center. I mean, that's huge. I'm a doula. I've been a doula for about 17 years. I'm attending births is something that I'm very passionate about. I've been at the births of hundreds of babies. And when I'm with a woman in labor going through transition, like right before pushing, when things get really intense for a lot of women and they start saying things like, I can't do this anymore, like, I can't do it, I hate it, this is awful, I'm going to die, or whatever women often spout out during that time. I know in my mind that that's really normal and that's what happens before pushing, and I'm not afraid, I'm not angry. I'm not angry with the woman for panicking. I hold the space and I literally tell myself, I get excited and stay positive, like, this is amazing. Right? This is exactly what's supposed to happen. And I will hold that energy for her. Mm-hmm. Now, what would happen if, instead of me doing that, what if I met her energy and started saying things like, oh my God, what's happening? Oh my God, I'm petrified, what's happening? It would, I mean, seriously think about it. Yeah. Like, it would make the experience, it would completely alter the entire experience for her, where things would get really bad fast. Things would be dysfunctional, complications would come up. It would take something that's really normal that just needed to be allowed and respected and turn it into an enormous thing that the implications of which could be very incredibly intense and negative. So I take that same idea when I'm working with parents to encourage them to hold the space for their kids. And when their kids start fighting, take a deep breath, maintain yourself. Don't lose your joyful energy you just had when you were dancing around the kitchen listening to music. Approach it like that. And that alone, approaching something with a positive mindset of not getting upset or inconvenienced, this is your job as a parent to do that. You wouldn't believe how quickly the negativity dissipates and you're just there. So if they're hitting each other, obviously I'm going to go and gently, please don't hit each other. But you want to be present and say to them, like, how can I help? That's the first thing I'll ask is how can I help? Very oftentimes parents get mad at the perpetrator, angry, and what are you doing to your brother? And
I do that, I must admit. I fall into that one.
I mean, I did too. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just normal because you react, but you don't know the whole story. You don't know what happened, and more than likely the younger one or the one that wasn't, that was the victim probably hit the other one before you even saw. And so I think it's really important to, like, be balanced with that situation, approach it, and just, like, how can I help mindset, and be very loving. And it's amazing how quickly kids get over it, and they're best friends 2 seconds later. I'm sure you've noticed that.
Wow, yes, it's amazing. It's I when just with some of the things you're sharing there, I notice a lot of the challenges that I face. I mean, it is, I think the whole home education and unschooling paradigm is one where parents have to really embrace a sort of a whole life thing, isn't it? It's not something you can compartmentalize off. We're just going to educate our children now. A lot of the people in England tend to, their first impression of homeschooling is that we have this desk and a bell goes off, and at 9 o'clock we sit down and do maths. And this is always the first illusion we have to dispel whenever we speak to any people about home education. But I'm fascinated as well because in the broader context, I can't help thinking that it's thinking we need more of. We need more individuals that are prepared to think for themselves. And it seems that your whole approach very much feeds into that. I mean, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about Devin, who you said is 18 now. I mean, so you've sort of gone the distance, really, haven't you? You've come out the other end, if you like, on a numerical sense. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, one thing that I could share is I think it's so important to tap into who you were and what you felt when you were a child yourself, because I do spend a lot of time thinking and remembering and feeling. And I think that's so important, is being compassionate and empathetic about how your children are responding to you and what they're really getting out of it. What do children learn from punishments? They don't learn the intention that you think they're learning. They're learning anger and resentment, and things are building. And so I think that doesn't work. If punishments worked, people wouldn't have to keep doing them.
Sure. What about, do you use trade as an alternative? Because obviously the conventional model is you punish and give them a disincentive to repeat. So does your unschooling approach focus more on a reward? Are you offering like a trade? If you do this, I'll do that. Or some people call it bribery. What's your? Perhaps you can look into that. If you wanted to get one of your children to maybe help cut the lawn or help with the shopping, how would you maybe try to make that bring about if we're not forcing them and not controlling them to do it?
I mean, and the interesting thing is I would do it the same way as I would if you were visiting me. How would I? I would treat my kids with the same respect. As if Nigel and his family were at the house and I needed a hand with something, I might be like, "Hey, would you mind coming and helping me with dinner?
Yeah.
I need help." And if you couldn't, you'd be like, "Oh, I'm in the middle of this, but maybe my partner could help you, maybe my kids," and you would work together as a team to get it done, even if you weren't available. So it's the same exact.
Fantastic. That's so cool. I mean, that sounds so obvious. I've heard people talk about I say ideal. It's an ideal for me because I've not yet got there. But treating my children as though they were distinguished visitors from another culture, and we know that makes sense. I mean, the way you just described it makes so much sense. But it's very difficult to remember, and I guess that feeds into what you're saying about being present.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and so it's really common sense. And I think one thing I love to share is that I don't think I'm necessarily. I mean, I might be offering a new perspective and ideas and paradigm. However, I think that a lot of people know this, and I think that's why they're so receptive to what I share, because there was something inside of you that knew all this is truth when you were little. And it's almost like awakening it and validating these feelings that maybe you had buried deep down for so long, because that's why it makes such sense. This is just common sense of respect for other human beings. It is. And it is amazing. Isn't it amazing that we do need someone?
Well, you see, I tend to, with the theme of this podcast, living outside the matrix, there's so many of those commonly accepted myths that most people just go along never even thinking, do you have to do that? With schooling, it's an obvious one, isn't it? And it's like believing all of the other, tidal wave of sort of commonly accepted truths, which are slowly being shattered. I mean, here we are, talking about a concept outside of just mainstream education, and there's so many other myths like fat makes you fat, and cholesterol's the cause of these are all being exploded these days, which is really exciting. So I see this in that greater context of trying to confront people's conditioning and get them into thinking, gosh, do we need to keep doing this way? Do we need to keep forcing children? And this whole new paradigm, I think, is so exciting, isn't it? This whole
it is. It's so exciting, and I think when we get to the root of why things are done the way they are, we realize that it's for the convenience and ease of those in control, and also for money. That's always at the root. When I talk about birth advocacy and home birth, for example, like when you learn the history of why birth moved into the hospital and the money-making business that it is, you understand why. This is an alternative for home birth and how it can be safe and why it is safe. And I really think the same is true for parenting and not using the institution of school and not buying into the authoritarian paradigm that was really just designed to control you. And so when you understand that, you learn that there is another whole way to be. So my son, Devin, who is 18, has never been to school, not one day, has never been punished, not even slightly.
Wow. I have to just quickly interject here. Sorry to just break your throat, but I have to take my hat off to you, because having been a homeschooling parent myself for a while, I've wrestled with my own conditioning, which has been authoritarian, authoritative, and I confess I have punished my children. I do confess that I have, not hit them, but just get so wound up, it's like allowing a situation to get the better of me, and losing that focus and that presence. So I take my hat off to you if you can, say that, and I've no doubt cause to doubt you, of course. But I think a lot of other parents would say that'd be really hard to do.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so we've never taken something away from them that belonged to them as punishment, and ever. We've never grounded them. We've never forbid them from doing something or seeing someone or going somewhere. And they've always had complete freedom with bedtimes, hygiene, food, media, technology. They've never had any limits put on any of those things. They've always had complete freedom surrounding them. And the interesting thing is, when people hear that, they get really nervous. I always feel the energy of this nerves, oh my God, it's because your mind starts going, assuming that it's going to be complete chaos and overuse of something. And what happens instead is the same way that you and I are living. We have balance with most things. I mean, any of our dysfunction or anything that we don't have balance with, when you really trace it back, it's usually due to some kind of glitch in the way we were raised, or some kind of unresolved issue, or something. But humans find balance with freedom. And so it's through freedom that kids find balance and healthy boundaries and their own limitations and so forth. So Devin, being 18, he was raised from day one like this. I've never done it any other way. And for me, this has just all been completely natural. I don't know where it came from. I don't know why. It just has. And all I've done is share my journey from the beginning and what I was doing different. And people just started to take notice. And then I became an advocate. And here I am 20 years later, almost 20 years later. And it wasn't something I planned. I just was wow, you don't have to control a child to get them to be good people. A lot of it is just how you see them. Our culture focuses on assuming negative intent from others, assuming negative intent from our kids. We are set from day one with the assumption that our kids are trying to manipulate us, right down to only feed them every 2 hours, don't pick them up too much when they cry, they'll get used to it, they're going to manipulate you. And it's it's all lies.
Yeah, the idea that a baby lying in its cot can have malicious intent to be wrapping mum around its finger is a bit absurd, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and hearing parents think that, it's heartbreaking to assume that they've been so conditioned and controlled themselves to believe that, because instinctually we don't feel that way. When you get to tribes and you see people that have been untouched by this whole conditioning, it would be completely insane to not hold the child all day, every day when they're newborns. It'd be insane not to eat when they wanted to eat. So we have been conditioned and trained to believe these obscenely ridiculous notions. But when you believe them long enough from day one, you just assume negative intent all the time. I mean, how many times can you remember, Nigel, being a boy and getting blamed for things that weren't your fault?
Yeah.
It was a very hopeless feeling of just that, defeating, and that no one ever really knew you because they assumed you were bad. And after a while, and I was just talking to Tiffany about this in the car, actually, just today, just a couple hours ago, I was talking about a friend of hers who's 17 and who was grounded for something she didn't do. And I was talking about, if you tell a child, a human being, long enough that they're bad, both by your energy of assuming negative intent and through punishing, you eventually just friggin' surrender and say, okay, we're bad people, and you become that. You lie, cheat, and steal, and you say, nobody believes in me, I'm obviously a bad person. You literally merge into that role because children naturally believe their parents. Even if they're rebelling against them, you're hearing those tapes constantly from teachers and parents that you're bad at, and you literally, it changes who you are as a human being.
Yeah, the parents are almost unconsciously negatively conditioning their children, aren't they? They're not even aware they're doing it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. There's this thing called the rice experiment that I did years ago and did it on my blog, and it's when there's 2 jars of rice, and on one jar you label, I love you, and the next jar you label, I hate you, and every day you pick up one of the jars and say, I love you, and you focus positive energy on it. And then you pick up the other jar and say, I hate you, and you consciously focus negative energy on it. I can send you the link if you want to check it out.
Yeah.
Ice that said, I hate you, was molded and mildewy within a couple, weeks. The other one was perfectly white.
That's
now, I'm just
fascinating.
going to share with you, I'm going to pull that into what I'm talking about here. no matter what you believe, some people might be hearing me being like, oh God, here comes the new agey stuff. But I'm serious. If you're looking at another human being all day, every day, thinking they're bad people and you assume negative intent and you're looking at them, that they're trying to manipulate you, you literally change that human being. You change that human. Even if you never even spoke to them, you would change them as a person. So how we feel about our kids has to be, we need to rekindle this inner knowing that they're good people from day one. Assume positive intent. So if I could say anything, is that I've always assumed positive intent for my kids. And I think that's a very natural thing to do.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Does that? Sorry again, I'm interrupting you. But does that must have a very positive effect on your relationship with your children, because when we're stuck in an authoritarian paradigm, you've made yourself into an adversary of your child, which is hardly the situation you'd want them to go through adolescence. If you're an adversary to them, because then they're never going to come to you with any issues that they really want to discuss. And it looks like I'm sure you've got things to say about it, but that most influential thing you've got, I imagine, is your relationship with your children, and you must be in a much better position to be able to, relate with them in a useful, as a friend, that you're a partner, aren't you?
Yeah, you're hugely influential when you're not in an authoritarian paradigm, because you've built this solid foundation of trust, and your children aren't afraid to be themselves because they know you're not going to take any of their freedoms away. In the authoritarian paradigm, kids can't be authentic with their parents because their freedom is always dangled in front of them of being taken away constantly, and it's a really negative experience. Kids are not, they might want to tell you things, but they're too fearful of having their freedom taken away in any way, shape, or form, whether it's grounding, whether it's being judged and looked at negatively. That used to kill me. I hated when my parents were mad at me. I just didn't. So I would avoid the truth, even though I probably should have told them sometimes, because I didn't want them to look at me as a bad person and then have that kind of negative energy toward me, because I was highly sensitive, and it really killed me. It killed me inside for them to look at me like that. And so, even if it's subtle, letting go of judgment and seeing your children as whole, perfect people the way they are, they aren't afraid. They're not afraid of being punished. They're not afraid of being controlled. So it's crazy to say my kids tell me everything, but they really do. Where there's not a topic that we haven't talked about. Like, people would be shocked to hear our conversations, and sometimes it's stuff even I'm like, okay, do I really need to hear this? It's even I'm the one with the discomfort sometimes. It goes into that territory.
Yeah.
And not only do they tell me everything, I want them to have their privacy too. Like, I don't expect that. My son has a girlfriend. They've had a serious relationship for years. That's not my business. Like, I don't want to hear anything personal, but they come to me. I'm the first they come to if they have a question about something to do with sex, and like my daughter coming to me saying, she went to the fair the other night with some new friends that lived around here, and they all go to school, and their parents really punitively. And she said, I was with this girl, and we were looking at some rings, and then when we left the booth, she showed me, and she said, I snatched this. And she said, why would that girl steal that? Like, why? What's the point? Why would you do that? Like, she tells me everything. And I said, well, some kids do it for the rush because they want to feel that. Some kids do it out of rebellion. They just have kind of fuck the world kind of energy. They just want to hurt because they're not allowed. There's so much built up resentment, which I can tap into from my own youth. Like, I know what that feels like.
That's so great to be able to have those things offered and be able to build a conversation around that. That's such a bond, isn't it? That's so real. Because whatever the issue is, then the child, living life, learning as they go on, whatever the issue they face, they're going to come back to you, aren't they? Which is just wonderful. That's it doesn't sound like the average parenting experience by quite a long way.
It's something I hurt for my kids kind of in this world sometimes, because my daughter, there are added challenges when they get older, because she said to me, I don't like that. I don't like that they do that. Some of them were spitting at somebody, and some of them were just being mean and bullying somebody. She said, Mom, when am I going to find some just normal friends of people that are just nice and cool to hang out with? Like, she's like, she doesn't want to smoke weed. She doesn't want to steal. But all of these kids, every teen her age, they're doing something like that. And so there is the challenge if you don't have a lot of unschoolers or kids that are parented this way in your area, it's really important to build these communities, because being on the forefront of change and that we're kind of pioneers living this life, my kids are now, they're dealing with it and they're coping with it, but they're good friends that are also parented this way. I live in New York, which is a 5-hour drive away, and this life isn't all rainbows and unicorns, you know?
No.
You know, there's challenges, and so these are the challenges I'm facing now. How to help my daughter navigate these friendships, because she's like, well, I like these people and they enjoy being with me and I like them, but I just don't know if I should be friends with them or not. So those are the kind of discussions that we're having right now surrounding the older kids and teens.
Yeah, well, it must be great to actually feel that you can be there for your children in a way that I think most conventional parents probably feel that they're not, and probably in reality that they're not. I was going to say, do you think do you see radical unschooling and indeed homeschooling in general? Is it catching on in the States? Is it a growing thing?
I think it goes through growth spurts. It's really interesting. Like, I'll see a huge wave of it. We've been on in the media, involved in different television shows that people that have had us on based on radical unschooling. We were on Dr. Phil 12 years ago, our first television appearance ever, speaking about this life. And after it aired, there was a huge surge of it for like a year and a half after. And we were on the show Nightline and a dozen shows. The show Wife Swap, which I think you have over there too, actually.
Yeah, we've heard of it.
Yeah, and so, which is not what it sounds. It has such a bad name. It's not. It's just, you know, so every time we're in the media, I do see a really big surge of it. And right now we're kind of, like, it's not really that huge at the moment as far as the unschooling goes. Peaceful parenting people are looking for, like the parenting side of it, whether they have kids in school or not. I'm seeing way more people, I think, wake up. I think once Trump was elected, it really woke people up, you know, to a lot of negative things that are going on, and people want to different, and they want change, and they want to empower themselves, and they want peace and freedom. Yep. So because peace and freedom are starting to get a little strangled over here, and people are really fearful of losing that, they're rushing to the resources available to introduce that into their lives, of their families. So a huge surge with peaceful parenting. Unschooling is something, you know, it's something that a lot of people, I think, are really open to way more than the parenting. So I do think it's more common.
It's growing. Sorry, it's certainly growing over here in the UK. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely a growing movement over here, but not massively fast. It's still a very fringe movement, if you like, and it seems to be also sort of frowned upon by the authorities. It doesn't seem to be, particularly removing children from school. We know people in our community over here in the homeschooling, home education community, who have maybe had difficulties within school, so they had to take their children out. They're maybe just not working with that authoritarian method or any other sort of challenges. It's actually quite difficult to extricate your children from school in the UK. It's better to have never really started. But I'm conscious of time at the moment. Do you want to maybe speak to? Do you know of any tips for any parents that might be thinking about doing this? I know you've got a great book on radical unschooling. Maybe you could talk about that. Any sort of tips that you'd throw out there for people considering it?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of great books on both topics. If you do a search on Amazon for unschooling, there's some great books there. My book, Radical Unschooling, A Revolution Has Begun, is available on Amazon. You could also buy it directly from me. I do parenting coaching, which is really, usually pretty booked up. I have a lot of people that are really interested in learning how to apply this to different age groups and to their family life, so that's an offering. I have a YouTube channel. My family has a YouTube channel called The Sparkling Martins, and we're in partnership with Maker Disney for our channel, which is really cool because that means that Disney is promoting unschooling.
Right.
It's huge, and it's like one of our biggest resources, and so there's tons of videos. I have about 50 plus interviews about this, and most of the TV appearances we've been on are all on that playlist on our channel called The Radical Unschooling Revolution.
Fantastic.
I think it's the only show that's not on there. ABC keeps pulling it down.
And let the viewers and listeners know your website address as well. I don't know if you mentioned that.
It's DaynaMartin.com, and I post articles to it, and there's videos, and so I think if you started with my website, you'd have a lot of great, just a lot of good ideas of how to apply this life and the options. So I want to be available to you. So anytime anybody has a question, you could find me on Facebook too, just Dayna Martin. You could find me on there and follow me. And all my contact info is on the website. So there's so many different resources out there. And yeah, I think in England, I was just there. So I spoke in Scotland. We had a good turnout for the talk there. And it was really powerful to see so many parents in Scotland be ready and open for this life. They started a Facebook group called Radical Unschooling Scotland, and there's already a Radical Unschooling England, UK. So
Great.
it's growing steady.
So that was where you were speaking in Scotland. It was Radical Unschooling Scotland, the event. Okay, we'll have to.
Well, yeah, the Facebook group was born out of the event. So the event there, somebody brought me there to speak. So I'll be going there again next year, and back to England to speak as well. So I look forward to that. We're doing a conference in London next year.
Excellent. So thank you very much to my very special guest on this episode, Dayna Martin, and thank you very much for listening. Please, as always, feel free to join in the conversation in the comments section below, and I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix. Until then, I wish you well.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.